Okay. Okay, it should be fine.
Okay.
Wonderful. Okay. So let's go and full screen this. Okay. So welcome to Into the Fluorescence Microscopy using Keyence BZX 800. So I'll go over a brief summary of what fluorescence microscopy is. I have tailored all of this more towards Keyence microscope itself. But this principles stay true for any kind of an epifluorescence microscope purpose. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about the goal of a microscopy, what is the goal of a microscope? It's to acquire any kind of fluorescent signal from cells or tissues which are labeled with fluorophore, which expresses either a fluorescent protein or some kind of a fluorophore, and in turn you want to visualize those fluorescent structure or structures to address biological questions. So the key over here is your cells or tissues are labeled with a fluorophore, which expresses a fluorescent protein. Now, how does this fluorophores or fluorescent protein work? So, for example, let's say if you have a GFP or fluorescent protein or a FITC kind of a fluorophore or a Alexa 488 kind of a fluorophore, you excite that with a blue light. Once you excite the molecule or the fluorophore with a blue light, it undergoes the molecules in the protein or the fluorophore reaches the excited state, but they cannot stay in the excited state for a long time. They have to come down to the ground state. While they come to the ground state, there are two things that are happening. One is they release the energy, and when they do so, they come down to the ground state at a longer wavelength, right? So this is your blue wavelength, for example, 488 nanometer. And when they come down to the ground state, uh, it's 520 nanometer, which is the green wavelength. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think in terms of any kind of fluorophore, it has got a broad spectrum. It's not as simple as 488 nanometer and 520 nanometer. Though we say that's the peak excitation and the peak emission, they have broad spectra, and that is something which is on a Stokes shift, and that this spectra can be looked on a browser like fpbase.org. Okay? Now, in terms of an epifluorescence microscope, you have a light source, which could be your metal halide kind of a bulb, which contains all the wavelengths of the spectra. Um, this goes on to, this is something called a filter cube. In the filter cube, you have got three mirrors. One is the excitation filter. The excitation filter will only allow the blue light to pass through. Again, this is the example of a FITC or a green fluorescent protein kind of a molecule that you, or a protein that you want to observe. So an excitation filter will only allow the blue light to pass through. There is a dichroic mirror. As the name suggests, it's dichroic, so two colors, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
going to allow the blue light to be reflected towards the objective, towards the specimen, all right? Now the
Mm-hmm.
specimen will be excited, it will emit green light. The green light will pass through the objective, through the dichroic mirror, okay? And the dichroic mirror also acts as a long pass filter, which means that if the long pass filter is 500 nanometer, it will allow all the light from 500 nanometer upwards to pass through the mirror, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So all the light which is 500 nanometer and longer will pass through the mirror towards the ocular or to the camera. So either you can see through the eyepiece or through detector, for example, a camera. Okay, and then you also have an emission filter over here. Now, with the emission filter, you don't want to detect the entire wavelength, which is longer than 500 nanometer. You want to have a small region of that, which could be, let's say, for example, 500 nanometer to 540 nanometer. So the emission filter will allow wavelength of a specific region to pass through, and you detect it. Okay. So this is in a nutshell how epifluorescence microscope works. But to make your life simple, you have lots and lots of hardware. Some of this is automated. Some of this also has got good user interface, so it becomes easy for you to control the entire system. You have a nice sample holder with different, which can hold different formats of plates and so on. So this is kind of a cross section of Keyence microscope. There are two parts over here that you can see. One is the epifluorescence part, which is right here, and second is the normal transmitted light path that you are looking at. So there is an LED lamp over here, and the reason I'm talking about transmitted light path is because you do want to see your cells using transmitted light, right?
Yeah.
So with regards to transmitted light path, you have an LED bulb over here, you have a reflector, bunch of condenser lenses, which focuses the light onto your sample. Um, the light is detected by the objective. It passes through a bunch of lenses towards the camera. Okay, so that's how you get your transmitted light image. The other path, which we will be talking a lot right now, is the epifluorescence path. Okay, so for example, I told you that this is as simple as how epifluorescence microscopy happens, and this is exactly what we are looking at over here. So in this situation, you have your excitation lamp over here. The metal halide lamp is over here. It passes through a bunch of lenses. There is an electronic projection element, which is if you want to do Z-sectioning, we can do using that. The light passes through a bunch of other lenses. This is where your filter cube is. All right. The filter cube has this dichroic mirror. Uh, the uh, the light which has the emission wavelength gets reflected off of the dichroic mirror up to your objective, to your specimen. The light comes back down and gets towards your camera, and that's the signal you are looking at. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so this is the epifluorescence part of the microscope. Now, there are five different parts which I will be talking extensively about so that you understand what exactly is happening. And I'll tie this up to the software that we are using and the options we have in the software. Okay. So the first is the excitation source. The excitation source that we have on Keyence is a metal halide lamp. Second are the filter cubes. So I'll go over the anatomy of a filter cube. I briefly talked about it, but I'll again repeat that. The objectives that we have, and the concept of resolution that comes with the objectives, the sample and the stage, the different kind of samples that you can hold on this stage, and a bit of the user interface that you have that goes along with the samples. And of course, the main thing, once the light comes back, it's detected by the camera, right? So again, camera is the uh, key element over here, which helps determine your image size and so on. So I'll talk a bit more about that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the first is the excitation source. So the excitation source on Keyence is a metal halide lamp. Now, compared to traditional metal halide lamp, which goes from 400 nanometer to 700 nanometer, the metal halide lamp on Keyence has a wavelength all the way from 400 nanometer to up to 1000 nanometer. What this means is if you have appropriate filter set, you can in fact use size 7 or near infrared kind of a dyes to ask questions with, which is not possible with conventional metal halide lamps, which can only generate wavelengths from 400 nanometers to 700 nanometers. Okay, and
Mm-hmm.
in that situation, you are restricted to something like size sci-fi, which is Alexa 647. So the filter sets that we have on Keyence installed right now are DAPI, FITSI, TRITSI, and Sci-Fi. And this is the excitation emission breakdown for each of them. And these are the dichroic mirrors that we have for each of these wavelengths. Now, when it says 350/50, what that means is uh, you can excite uh, at wavelengths 350 plus 25, 350 minus 25. So
Okay.
the entire spectra that you get over here is from 325 nanometers to 375 nanometers. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and same way for all of them. So while we are saying that let's say, for example, FITSI might have an optimum excitation of 488, but when we are in fact exciting, we are going from 450 to 490. Okay, so
Mhm.
that's the entire region that we are exciting. All right. So now again, going back to the dissection of the filter set, we have an excitation filter, we have a dichroic mirror, which I checked out, and we have an emission filter. And let's say, for example, you have your slide over here, you have your light, which is passing through the excitation filter. Now you only get a blue light because let's say this is for green for 488. So we get 488 blue light, gets reflected back onto the sample gets excited, and you get your green light out of the emission filter. Okay.
Mhm.
When it comes to the objectives, on this microscope, we have got 5 different objectives. Um, 3 of them are air objectives, for example, 4x, 20x, and 40x. And they have a numerical aperture of 0.13, 0.45, and zero point 0.6. I'll talk in a bit about what numerical aperture means and what is the importance of that. And we also have oil immersion lenses. So the oil immersion lenses that we have are a 40x and a 60x oil lenses. And they have a numerical aperture of 1.3 and 1.4. Now, one thing with the air objectives that we have on this microscope, uh, we have something called the correction collar. And the correction collar is for the 40x and a 20x objective. And I just want to quickly change this. This is 1.2 and not 1.5. And what these numbers mean, and I'll show you the correct correction color when you are here tomorrow in person,
Mhm.
because you will have to change it. When you are using a glass cover slip, you have to use a correction color of 0.17, and 0.17 is the thickness of the glass cover slip of 0.17 millimeters. And when you are using a plastic, you have to change the correction color to 1.2 because the thickness of the plastic is 1.2 millimeters. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't change this, your image will look pretty terrible. I mean, at the moment you're using plastic, but there might be some other user who might be using glass, so they will be changing this, and then that's something which you will have to see every time as to what is where the correction color is set for you. Okay, so
Okay.
I'll show this to you tomorrow. Again, mainly because you will be using 20 and a 40x objective quite a bit. All right. So when it comes to objectives, it's not a simple uh, tube of uh, metal with glass on the front and at the back. It's in fact, if you look at the cross section of an objective, there are plenty of mirrors in here. And when you are changing the correction color, the lenses over here are moving up and down to accommodate for that change in the thickness of your glass cover slip or of your plastic. So if we look at any objective, you will get a bunch of information, whether it's corrected for flat field, which means plan, APO or something, which means it's corrected for a bunch of aberrations. What is the magnification? What is the numerical aperture? What is the working distance? And what is the cover slip thickness that you can use this for, right?
Mhm.
So typically, all the oil immersion objectives, they are 0.17, and that is exactly what we have over here, which is when you are using glass, change the correction color to 0.17, and plastic is 1.2, and typically that's what it says over here. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, so, all right. So in terms of lenses, they are complex and they're expensive. Use them, do not abuse them. In case in future, if you are using, let's say, any kind of a cover slip and you are using all immersion objective, wipe off the oil from the objective, and do let me know when you plan to use oil immersion lens in future.
Mhm.
I will make sure that I revisit some of these points with you. Um, in training tomorrow, I will definitely make you use oil immersion lens so that you kind of um, get the feeling of the images that this microscope can take. Don't bathe the objectives in unnecessary amount of oil, and make sure that if the oil gets onto any kind of dry objectives, let me know. I will clean that up. Now, um, again, when it comes to objectives, we cannot let it go without talking about resolution. So resolution at the end of the day is all about the numerical aperture. And numerical aperture, which an A is what we are talking about, is defined as n times sine alpha. And n is the refractive index of the interface. So if you are using an air objective, your n is going to be 1. If you are using oil, there are different refractive indices of the oil available, but assuming that your oil is 1.51, the n is going to be 1.51. And sine alpha is the cone or the angle of the cone of light that's getting into your objective. So, for example, for a low numerical aperture objective, the cone of light is going to be less versus for a high NA objective, because the objective is close to the cover slip. The cone of light that's getting in is going to be pretty high. So the sine alpha for an oil immersion lens is greater than the sine alpha for a low NA air objective. So if you put this into the equation, of course, the NA for your oil immersion objective is going to be higher compared to the NA for your air objective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, if we kind of quickly look at this tutorial, which tells you about numerical aperture and image resolution. So this is, for example, looking into beads. Let's say if you have beads which are about 200 nanometer in size, right? If we are using a low NA.2 objective and we look through a line profile for one of the beads, what we will see is at the center we will get this big peak in the intensity, but at the side we get this disk kind of patterns. Okay, and this is called the airy disk. As we increase the numerical aperture, the width of the airy disk reduces and the peak also gets sharpened. So as we increasing the area of the objective, we end up seeing sharper peaks. What this also means is now our resolving power increases. The resolving power is the ability to separate two spatially close objects, right? So, for example, if we look into this area, um, these guys are together, but we can still spatially separate and say that this is one bead, this is another bead, this is another bead, and this is another bead. However, if we go to low NA, now we cannot spatially separate any of this three beads that were together before, right? And as we increase the NA, our power to spatially separate these objects also increase. Okay.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, all of this depends on your question. If your question is, I want to observe small puncta kind of object, then you definitely have to use a higher NA objective. In your case, you just want to look at cells, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't, this doesn't matter to you. But let's say in future, if you do want to image something which is small, then all of this will matter. All right. So again, resolution is the ability to differentiate between two distinct objects or to closely spaced areas, and the resolution is defined as lambda over 2NA. So lambda is the emission wavelength over 2 times the numerical aperture. And in the best case scenario, the resolution that you can achieve is 250 nanometer laterally and 550 nanometer in the axial space. And this is with the best objective and the best scenario. So this would be a 60x objective with 1.4 NA numerical aperture. And if we draw a line profile through this. This is the kind of a peak that we get in XY direction for one bead. These are again two beads which are not resolved. And that's what you can see over here, that they're in fact two, but they appear as one. And when you resolve them, you get two distinct peaks. And in Z direction, uh, the the resolution is always poor. It looks a bit squished up, and that's what you see in Z direction. Okay. All right. So this kind of concepts become important when you want to do Z sectioning and Z imaging, right? This is not a confocal, but we do have the ability to do Z imaging, and I'll talk that about in a bit later. So when it comes to the stage and samples, um, this is a fully motorized microscope. So it has also uh, got a motorized stage, which allows you to do multidimensional X, Y, and Z imaging and acquisition. We also have options of different stage inserts, which allow you to acquire different slides, and you can put three slides at one time. In your case, we can put different kind of plates. It could be glass plate, it could be plastic bottom plates. You can put a single well plate, or you can put a multi-well plates.
Okay.
So the interface is very user friendly, and you can move between different areas within the slides as well as the multi-well plates. So um, what you will see in terms of moving in XY direction is you can set up a particular slide that you want to see, and this will become much more clear once I put a slide and we can go and play with it a little bit. You can simply click anywhere you want to on the template, and your XY focus area will directly go over there. You can also move a tiny bit by clicking these arrows that you have, or you can slide manually on the screen itself and move slowly. In case of Z position, if you click on autofocus, it will give you the best focus that the software thinks is correct for you. And most of the times it turns out to be pretty good. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that. And then if you want to um, do multi XY imaging, again, what I said, it's very easy. You can quickly go and point and click anywhere you want, and it will take you over there. Okay. Uh, some of the other key features of Keyence is that if you have a big slide and you don't know where you want to go, you can create a navigation map, in which case it's going to swirl around and acquire a 6 by 8 sort of an image and put all those images together. So now you know the big area, and select a particular field from that area. So you can do this using a low mag objective, for example, 4x, and then switch to a high mag objective, could be 20x or 40x, and select a particular area from this big navigation map that you have. Um, it also allows for tiling and stitching. So let's say if you want to acquire multiple fields at high mag objective, using a high mag objective, and you want to put them together, in that situation, you can also do a tile and stitching. Okay. Now, in case of Z imaging, this is not like your traditional microscope where you have the focus knobs on the side. So what if you want to go up and down other than autofocus, right? So other than clicking autofocus in Z, if you want to move in Z direction fast, you can click Shift, Control, and use the mouse scroll wheel. And these are some few things that you will have to remember, which is if you want to move fast, you click on Shift, Control, and the mouse scroll wheel. If you want to move at a medium speed, it's Control and mouse scroll wheel. And if you want to move slow, it's going to be, which is the fine focus, right? So it's mouse scroll wheel. So slow is kind of fine focus, fast is kind of coarse focus, and medium is somewhere in between. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And um, this is not a confocal microscope, it's an epifluorescence microscope. Now, one of the drawback of an epifluorescence microscope is that um, it gives you a lot of background because it's imaging through the entire depth of the specimen and not at a particular position. Now, confocal removes that by using a pinhole. However, this system has got two different hardware and software adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
One is a 1D slit and second is a 2D pinhole method, which also helps in removing background. So just kind of an example, if you look at this cells over here, and we will again do this while we have the slide on the system. So for example, you have a 1D with the 1D slit method. Um, in this case, there is you're looking at actin and you can see all this background. With 1D slit method, you can see this patterns coming up. And once all is said and done, much of the background is removed, right? So that's what you get with 1D slit. And with 2D pinhole, it puts this kind of grid kind of patterns onto the image. And that's how the software determines what is the real fluorescence, what is the background, and it also takes care of the background, and now you get this image. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if you are doing Z stacks and you want to make sure that you eliminate any kind of out of focus fluorescence, you can use either 1D slit or 2D pinhole. Now, the only drawback of using any of these methods is that to generate those grid kind of patterns, it has to take multiple images, right?
Mm.
So depending on the exposure time that you are having, um, your sample will be exposed to the fluorescent light for that amount of time. And doing a Z-sectioning with either 1D slit or 2D pinhole also increases the time because the system has to acquire multiple images.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So now talking about cameras, and camera really helps in formation of an image. And images are nothing else but bunch of pixels, and each of these pixels have got bunch of values associated with them. Okay. So if we zoom into a small area over here, we can see that things in the background are white, things in the center are black, and each of these black values have bunch of numbers associated with that. Okay, so just kind of try to get this idea in your head that an image is nothing else but collection of pixels, and those pixels have numbers associated with them. Now, the camera that we are using uh, can give you a 1920 by 1440 pixel dimension area of your image, right? So that is the standard. And while the software also allows to do something which is called high resolution zoom image, that is more like an interpolated. So I would rather skip this part completely whenever you see any option of saving it. It's just going to be a pretty huge image, and you are not going to get much out of it.
Okay.
So let's kind of just keep it at 1920 by 1440. That's the best resolution you can get. And from there on, you can bin the image, and I'll talk about what binning means. And once you bin the image, the number of pixels go down. So 1920 by 1440 then becomes 960 by 720, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you can bin 2 by 2, 3 by 3, or 4 by 4.
Okay.
And so let's see what binning really means. So let's say, for example, this is your 1920 by 1440. In that scenario, each of these pixels you have, and I've kind of color coded the pixels. This is kind of faint blue, this is faint orangish, and so on. Now, if you bin all of this, if you bin this by 2, what will happen is this 4 pixels, and I let me just edit this. So this 4 pixels over here, they will become 1, this 4 pixels over here, these guys will become 1. And this is exactly what you are seeing. Earlier, this were the 4 pixels here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all the intensity you are getting in this 4 pixels are now in 1 pixel,
Okay.
which means that uh, your image becomes a bit pixelated. So for example, if you look at this guy versus this guy, you can see a bit of pixelation happening.
Mm-hmm.
So your image will get a bit pixelated. When you are looking at a fluorescent image, what this also means is um, all the intensity which you are getting on individual pixels over here, 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 and here is now part of 1 pixel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means that your image will be brighter if you do 2 by 2 binning compared to your normal scenario. And this is something which I'll show to you when I put the slide on the microscope. Versus if you were to do a 4 by 4 binning, what you have is all this 4 pixels you are seeing over here now is part of this 1 pixel here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and now you can clearly see that the image is getting much more pixelated. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's binning in nutshell. And I'll show this to you exactly once I put a slide on the microscope. All right. So again, with some of the with regards to some image properties, um, there are some settings which I'll talk in later slides when I talk about the user interface. And some of those settings are the intensity of light that gets to your sample. And you don't want to expose your sample to 100% fluorescent light. You want to cut that down. One of the reasons you don't want to expose your sample to a lot of fluorescent light is because your sample could be susceptible to photo bleaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in your case, and this is all depending on the fluorophore. If you're using a fluorophore like FITSI, it's pretty terrible. If you're using something like Alexa 488, it's okay as long as your sample is mounted with a good mounting media. In your case, you have your cells which are in media. They are not in any kind of mounting media. So photo bleaching could be an issue if you are trying to, image through Z section or so on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think your fluorophores are pretty bright, so I don't think that should be a big deal. But that's something to be determined for your samples. Okay.
Okay.
Second, so what we can do is we can use neutral density filters to cut on the amount of light which is passing through. If your sample is not embedded in any kind of mounting media, I would recommend to cut down on the intensity of light which is going through. So use a neutral density filter and use a higher exposure on the camera, okay, versus using 100% of the light and lower exposure. Um, use um, use the neutral density filter and go for longer exposure times.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, all right. So general housekeeping things. Uh, so that was in nutshell what I wanted to talk about for the concepts. Let me know if you have any questions.
Okay.
Um, okay, and then I'll jump onto the general housekeeping things that we need to do over here. One is logging into the system. So you will log into the system using your Emery ID. That's for the computer. Once you log into the computer, you will have to log into the PPMS system. Again, you will use your Emery ID. You
Mm-hmm.
will click on the Keyence software, and I'll show this to you. You will select your lab once you log into the software, and there is no password associated with that. Uh, the reason why I have created a lab is so that once you want to come back, the previous settings that you have used will be preserved
Okay.
because people use the scope for different applications. And I want to make sure that whenever you walk in, your settings are preserved. Okay. And don't use anybody else's account or even my account. Just stick to your lab account.
Okay.
And one thing is there will be kind of a tussle between people for the sci-fi filter set, whether to keep it inside or not, because that's the filter set that we have designated to be removed when somebody wants to use the transmitted light. So that is something which I'm trying to figure out depending on users as to what is the maximum use. But I'll still teach you how to remove the filter set and use transmitted light. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, so to open the software, once you come in, I will make sure that your desktop is organized in this manner. So you have a BZX 800 viewer, that's the acquisition software, BZX 800 analyzer, that's the software which you will use to put your Z stacks together, to open the image, to do stitching and so on, okay? And
Mhm.
it can also do a lot of quantification. And the wide image viewer is, let's say if you have a bunch of stitched images and if you want to look at that, you can open that using the wide image viewer. All right. So these are the three software elements that you need to use. Now, to use the BZX 800, you need to have the microscope turned on, or else you cannot connect the microscope, and BZX 800 won't start. If you just have a bunch of images and you want to put them together, you can use the analyzer and put the images together. Okay.
Yes.
And those three software icons are also over here. Okay. So this is what I was telling you. Once you log in, it will ask for your user, and from the drop-down menu, go down to the Rupker lab and just hit login. There is no password with that. Once you log in, it will ask you what kind of a sample you have, and if you have a 6 well plate, a 12 well plate, a slide, whatever it is, just say okay from there. Okay.
Mhm.
And then click on the capture still images, and once you click on capture still images, the software will open. uh, Come on. The software will open over here, and let me just move this down. And now there are a lot of things over here. Okay, so I'm gonna break down each of these things that you are looking on the screen. So the first thing, yeah, look at this. The first thing that you will do is try to set up the imaging parameters for whatever you are doing. To do so, I would go and click on single color. Okay. Once you click on single color, you will have other options. For example, of course, you want to select what kind of an objective you are using. So in order to do that, you can click on the lens. You can click on the lens. Um, you can click on the lens over here and select for the appropriate lens. Once you have selected for an appropriate lens, you want to select the channel whose parameters you want to set for. So then you will click on a particular channel whose parameters you want to set. Once you click on a particular channel, you want to set the illumination intensity, right? So this is what I was telling you, which is how much light passes through and gets to your sample. Okay. So
Mhm.
right now over here it says 100%, but we can change this by introducing neutral density filters in between. Uh, you also want to turn on the low photo bleach mode, and this will become much more clear tomorrow when you are here as to what's exactly happening with low photo bleach. While it's turned on, what happens is the excitation light won't reach your sample at all the times. It will only reach the sample every time you are trying to focus on the sample. Okay.
Mhm.
Then is the camera setting. Now, this system can do both fluorescence as well as color imaging. So you want to make sure that your camera is set to mono. If you are doing, let's say, imaging of any kind of samples, then you would use the color camera, but that's not the case with you.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be using the monochromatic camera. Uh, this is where the 1440 numbers I was talking about, resolution sensitivity, comes into picture, and I'll talk a whole lot about this in subsequent slides because this is very important. If you were to do any 3D, uh, you will use this sectioning tab, but you are not doing that at the moment, so let's skip it, and we can touch that base once we get there. Um, then is the microscope and the stage that I just talked about earlier, that you can autofocus using this button right here, and you can move on X and Y direction using the stage view. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the other thing I talked to you about was the navigation. Let's say if you want to go and image a particular area, right away you can click on the navigation tab. Okay. Apart from that, we have the options of doing multi-point capture. So that is something which might be helpful to you. So I'll also show some of the features of multi-point capture. Definitely, you will be using the ZStack acquisition, right? So I will show you how to acquire ZStack because your samples have good amount of depth,
Mm-hmm.
and either we will do multi-point for you or stitching. So once you bring your samples in tomorrow, we will figure out what's the best way of uh, imaging for your samples, either doing a multi-point or either using a stitching mode, and we will figure that out tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and let me just clear all of this. So the last bit of thing is capturing your image. So if you want to click one of the image, you hit capture over here. But if you want to acquire ZStack or a stitched image, you click on this button, which always gets behind this logged window. So you will have to minimize this logged in window frequently and hit this. Okay.
Yeah.
Now the second thing is, if you are acquiring just one channel, this is what you will use. But if you want to go and acquire multiple channels, you will hit multicolor, and that will give you opportunity to acquire multiple channels. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I will talk about multiple colors when I show you um, the actual demo right now. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So now I want to break some of these options into individual pieces. So let's first talk about the lens. When we look at the lens, this is how it appears like, but there are two different buttons that you can click. One is the lens itself. Once you click on the lens, this objective itself, you will get bunch of options over here, which will allow you to select different objectives. Okay, so you can select the 4x, the 40x, 40x oil, or 60x oil. Now, if you want to select a 40x or a 60x oil, you also have to click on something called the adjust the lens. And once you click on adjust the lens tab, what it will do is it will bring the objective in front of you, and something I will show this to you tomorrow, so that you can easily put the oil on top of the objective, and not kind of go in and try to mess the system with the oil. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and click OK over there. And it also reminds you over here that the 20 and 40x could have something like a correction color, and that's based on the thickness of the sample holder or the cover glass, which is 0.17 millimeter or 1.2 millimeter. Okay.
Yeah.
So once you adjust that, the thing with the oil immersion objective is that it does not come to the right Z focus. In order to get the oil immersion lens to the right Z plane, you have to go to the menu, go to the option, and over there uncheck on this prevent lens crash. And once you uncheck on the prevent lens crash, it will tell you whether you want to disable that and say yes. And that's the only way you can use the oil immersion objective. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that also gets a bit tricky, and I'll show you how to use the oil immersion objective tomorrow. Um, One of the important thing is when you are using oil immersion objective, the I hope I'm not messing something up. Okay. When you are using the oil immersion objective, your autofocus button, is disabled. So if you want to use autofocus, you will have to enable prevent lens crash. Okay. So again, with your air objectives, you can use autofocus, and you have to check or click on prevent lens crash. But when you are using all immersion objective, uncheck on prevent lens crash and go out from there. In case of channel settings, as I told you earlier, you have single color and multicolor options. So you go into channel setting and individually select each of the channels first. Set up the imaging parameters for each of the channels first. And some of the weird thing about this software is that when you capture the image in monochrome, i.e., the default color, it gives you a 16-bit image, which when you open in Fiji, it appears like this 16-bit. Whereas when you apply a color to it, it
Yeah.
saves the image as um, an RGB image, which is a bit weird thing with this software. So I highly recommend taking the image as default and later on using Fiji, change the lookup table, and so instead of using the color option that they provide. If you want to observe the colors, by all means, go and do that. But I would not capture the images with the colors that they provide, okay?
Okay.
Because then quantification will be a huge mess.
Okay.
Okay. So again, with regards to illumination settings, some of the things I was talking about earlier with you is that you have the neutral density filters available so that you can prevent 100% of the light coming out, and you can use the low photo bleaching mode to prevent photo bleaching of your sample. Okay, this is something which will become much more clear to you when I put the sample in. In terms of camera settings, because we are looking at fluorescent samples, so we'll be using monochromatic camera. And if we look at the settings for each of this, so uh, you can click on high resolution and it will tell you what's going on, right? And again, if I go all the way back, it doesn't give you the number, what is the pixel value of your image, but it tells you high resolution, standard, and high sensitivity, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what that really means is, oops, let me just, what that really means is, okay, I have the next slide, okay. What that really means is you are acquiring something at 1920 by 1440, 960 by 720, 640 by 480. So that's what this um, this words mean, which is its high resolution standard and so on. So once you click on high resolution, you can go to custom, and in the custom, you got a chance to increase to change some of the other settings. And the settings that you can change are gain and binning.
Mm-hmm.
So gain is essentially pushing the dynamic range um, of your um, of your intensities from 0 to, let's say, 500. So let's say, for example, your original intensities are from 0 to 500. If you apply gain to it, what will happen is it will push everything depending on the gain factor to 100 to 600. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that 500 dynamic range is not changing. All it's doing is it's pushing it further away so things look bright to you. So instead of 0 to 500, it's now from 100 to 600 or 200 to 700 and so on. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that also means that your background noise also increases with gain. But sometimes, or many times, if your signal is pretty weak, gain helps you. But that's not the first thing I will play with. The first thing I would play is with binning. And I was supposed to have this come up later, but totally terrible animation skills of mine over here at display. So when you look at gain, these are the options you get with gain, and with binning, these are the options you get with binning. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
we'll play with these things, and this were the aspect ratios again that I was talking about. And when we go to the stage, we have a bunch of options with stage. You can change the layout and template the way you want to. Okay, so these are the things I wanted to talk about really quick. Uh, and I will in fact show you all these things instead of going round and round. Okay, so let me jump onto putting a slide and show you a slide real quick. Okay, so let me pause the recording for a second. All right, so once you put your sample on the scope with the appropriate kind of a plate holder, you can go and click on the BZX 800 viewer, and it's asking me to log in. For you, you will go with the Ripper Lab. I'll just use mine.
Okay.
So log in over here. Now, once you are here, you have options of changing the filter cube. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, if you click on the filter cube over here, you can change the fourth one. So if you click on the fourth one, and I'll show you how to remove the cubes tomorrow in
Okay.
person, and you can change that to, let's say, bright field and sci-fi. Let me check if I have. So I do have a filter cube right now. I don't need bright field, so I'll leave it the way it is. But tomorrow when you come in, it should be a good point for us to change this, because you definitely want to use bright field, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we will change that tomorrow. And we can assign colors over here, or we can also assign colors later, but I would just keep everything white. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And once you are ready, click on capture still images, and it's going to ask you what kind of a slide or a sample holder you want, and just say slide and say okay. So it can accommodate up to 3 different slides. So that's what you are looking at. I have put the slide in this area, so I'll just take it right over there. Now, the first thing I told to you was to go to single color. So I'll go to single color. I'll change DAPI to default. Okay. Then select the objective. I'm happy with the 20x objective, so I'll leave it over there. My excitation line at the moment, it's at 100%. And I've enabled the low photo bleach mode. If I do not have the low photo, if I that, and okay, so once I click live image, I should be able to see the light coming onto my sample, which surprisingly I do not see. All right. So as I said, it's difficult to see the DAPI excitation in with the room lights on. So I'll switch to 480. It becomes a bit easy to see everything. Okay. So I got 100%. I'm turning on the low photo bleach mode now that I can see something. And again, I will be changing the exposure. So let's say I can see something right now. So let's keep it where it is. I'll hit autofocus. And what you will see is, I'll say yes. Do you want to turn the low photo bleach mode off? Say yes. And it's going to go through and give you, and you want to again turn on, say yes, so that the light turns off now, okay? And it goes to like almost the right focus that you want to be, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And if you are not happy, you can use the mouse scroll wheel and go back and forth a bit. And again, remember, if you want to move a lot, you can hit Shift, Control, and scroll wheel. That's what I did. I'm moving. This is kind of a coarse focus, medium focus, Control and mouse scroll wheel, and fine focus, just the mouse scroll wheel. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
that's what I was doing over here. And if I'm happy with this, I can keep it this way. I can reduce the brightness. And at times, what might happen is um, your image might look pretty dim to you, right? And that's because, I mean, I've already highlighted this. So one of the problem with the software is they always by default give you things in the range of 0 to 255 instead of the real bit depth, which could be from 0 to 65,000. Okay. So that's the glitch with the software. It is what it is. Um, so just I would say kind of deal with it for the moment, right? So I'm going to increase the brightness so that we get the full dynamic range of the image. So that's where we are. Uh, Now comes the few other questions which we were talking about, which is the resolution sensitivity, the high resolution. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go to standard, so for example, in high resolution, if I go on to custom, it shows that my exposure is almost half of a second. My gain is 6 decibel right now. Okay. So if I
Mm-hmm.
go to no gain, the image looks pretty dim. This is gain of 6 decibels. This is gain of 12 decibels.
Mm-hmm.
This is gain of 8 decibels, right? So
Okay.
the image keeps on getting brighter as I increase the gain.
Yeah.
And it's not that I have significantly increased my background. So what I want you to focus on is when I was telling you that your intensities shift from left to right, right? So if it's from 0 to 500, it goes from 100 to 600. So have a look at this right over here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what you will see over here is right now, um, with gain of 0, this is where it is from 0 to let's say 50. If I go with 6 decibels, it's spreading out. If I go with 12 decibel, it's again going from left to right. If I go with 8 decibel, it's
Mm-hmm.
again shifting. And with 16, it's shifting again, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So this is the kind of spread I was talking about when you apply the gain function. Okay. All right. So let's go back to, um, I'll just keep this gain for the moment. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we apply binning, so there are two different ways you can apply binning to this. One is directly from here and say, I want to bin it 2 by 2. And what you saw is as soon as I bin the image, it got bright, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can bin this 3 by 4,
Mm-hmm.
3 by 3.
True.
But what will happen is once you save the image, the image will get pixelated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you don't want pixelation, if you want good quality image, I would say keep it at keep the binning off.
Okay.
You can play with um, the exposure time. You can play with the gain a little bit. Okay. Now let me cancel this, and if I go to standard, it again increases. Okay.
Okay.
So you can go to high resolution, and you can go to custom, and you apply binning. That is the same thing as using standard. Okay, there is no difference between them.
Okay.
Okay, so just kind of get that concept in your head. I don't want you to click on things without understanding what you are clicking over here, because there are lots of things that you can click on over here. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's go back to microscope. uh, and let me, so once we are happy with the setting that we have, um, and I will probably increase this to 12 so it looks a bit brighter. Uh, what we can do is we can set up um, the intensities for all the channels. Okay, so this is for my 488. Let's go and set the intensity for DAPI. Again, I'll increase the exposure so that I can see my nuclei better. Okay. And go to Tritzy and set the exposure for my mitochondria. Okay.
Okay.
So once I have done this, and if I want to take all the images together, I can go to multicolor, and let's say I turn all these channels on. Now, once you turn all the channels on and you hit capture, you will capture all three images at the same time, and it's going to ask me where I want to save the images. Okay, so we save the images in data drive A, user data 2021, just the way you are familiar with this structure. Okay, so go to data drive A, user data 2021, your lab, and I'll just create a new folder with today's date saying that doesn't matter. Okay, so okay, and call it a group folder. So say images or whatever the cells are, um, and all of this will be stored in one folder called the cells. Okay. Now the
Okay.
thing is, there is one more thing is it it gives you image sizes to store here. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, although it's giving you the image size that you want to store your image in, you are not doing any binning over here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So don't confuse the change in the image sizes over here versus what you see over here.
Okay.
This is just that, let's say, if whatever settings I have at the moment, if I want to downsize my image and you want to downsize them right here, you can do it. But I wouldn't worry too much about it, because you can always downsize the image even in Fiji. So don't worry about that part. Okay.
Okay.
So I'll click on original and say okay. It will tell you how many images it will acquire. Uh, and say yes. It should only be 3 images. I don't know why it's saying. Oh, and an overlay. So it will also create an overlay of
Okay.
these 3 images. Okay, so say yes. So by default, it will open up in the image analyzer, and that's this software. Now, this is a good point to talk a little bit about that. So once you have acquired an image, everything will be grayed out, and you are wondering why I cannot click anywhere. That's because you have to go and hit here, which is
Okay.
the live image. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
remember every time that once you come over here and things look grayed out and you cannot do anything, just click on live image
Okay.
and everything will come back. Okay. So you do have options of uh, figuring out what you want to do in terms of where you want to store the images and whatnot. But also whether or not if you are annoyed every time you capture an image and the images keep on opening automatically,
Okay.
you can disable that from here. Okay, so that's totally up to you how you want to configure this for yourself, whether you want to automatically save the images or you want to manually go and before you capture the image you want to have a certain name that you want to write of the image. I will leave that depending on your convenience.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
I find it very helpful to have the software open up and show me the images once I've acquired them. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I will leave this one, but just want to show this to you where to access this setting from. So again, you go down to capture, open optional setting, and you can access that over here. Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's put colors to this and then see what happens. So let's say I put colors to this, guys, and let's keep Ritzy the way it is. Okay, and I hit capture. It's gonna capture these images. And it will give me an overlay of all the three images.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the thing is, this overlay is pretty good, except that what you will see is this one, that it saves the image as an R. It shows that it's an RGB image versus a grayscale image, and that's the most annoying thing about this software, which typically it's just your regular image and then you put a lookup table on it, versus this software somehow just throws something very weird at you.
Mm.
And that can be seen. So data drive, user data 2021, your lab, training, and if I open Fiji, and if we compare, let's say this one versus this one, this is your 16-bit. If we look at the dynamic range, grayscale shows from 141 to 65. And over here for this one, it shows the same thing. Well, let me reset. Right? It doesn't show anything
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's an RGB image. Okay. So what you have to do is you have to manually go and go to a channel which in fact has your color,
Mm.
right? Because
Yeah.
it's our versus over here, this is exactly what you want. So that's the problem with acquiring the colored images. Now,
Okay.
where it's really good is directly opening the overlaid image. If you
Uh-huh.
this then you don't have to go to Fiji and overlay the images together.
Okay.
You got a nice overlay over here, and this is where it's really good.
Okay.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to show you those differences. All right, so let's go back over here. Now, I told you again, click on live image to get what we have. This has got a good navigation tool. So let's say if I want to get kind of a comprehensive idea of different fields or the area, um, I've already created a bunch of navigations. So let me just delete all of them at this point instead of keeping. So this is how it will tell you. what you want to do and just say yes, add, and it will go into a swirly pattern
Okay.
and acquire all these samples for you. Okay. Now
Mm.
the thing is, once it's done acquiring all of them, and you can stop at any point if you want to. You can go to a particular field or zoom in and select, and these are all low resolution images that you are seeing. Um, you can say, I want to now acquire this field. Okay. So once you are here, and the best part is the stage itself moves to that field. Okay. So you don't have to worry about anything. You just directly go to this field and say, I want to acquire or recapture all. So it will show you how the images look in this field.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a nice thing. Now let's say at this point I'm on a 20x uh, objective, and if I want to move to a 40x objective, the good thing is it knows exactly where the field of view is in relationship to this larger captured area. Okay, so we
Mm-hmm.
can again precisely go to this new area, which is exactly this, and say recapture all, and that's what we are getting. Okay,
Okay.
so now if we want to put some oil on this, actually before we do that, let's just play with some multi-point. So let's say um, now over here you want to capture selected areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me go back to this area, um, and I can set this. If I want to acquire this, I will set this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to acquire this, I will go and set this area. Okay. So now, if I want to acquire all these three different areas or each of these three areas, all I have to do is go to the multi-point setup and hit start capture. So essentially, this will uh, and say okay. So the reason it said it's really big is because I also have stitching on. I don't want stitching.
Okay.
Now it makes more sense. And hit start capture. So cells, right? So that's about reasonable. We have 16 images
Okay.
and say yes. So it's gonna go through each of these areas and to go got a bit out of focus. Okay, so we can open the image folder, and it saved each of the areas as 1, 2, XY, 1, XY, 2, XY3, and XY4. And you can open them over here, or you can also go to the analyzer. You can open an image, go to multi-point, let's say XYO2, and you want to open this image, right? Or you can also load a group of images. I don't know if that will be perfect, but let's give it a shot. A drive, user data. No, so you cannot load a folder like this. If you want to load, it has to be a stitch of images and so on. Okay, but you can open individual images. So that's the multi-point. Okay.
Okay.
Close that. What you can also do other than go back to live image is something called stitching. So let's say, let me uncheck the multi-point and remove that. I can go over here and say I want to acquire from here to here. So enable stitching, set edge points. I want here, say set. I want something over here, say set. So essentially it's going to acquire this entire area. And just for sanity, I will just keep one channel on instead of all of them. And if I hit start capture, what I will call this as stitch. Okay. Say yes. And it will go and capture all this
Okay.
fields together. And now if you analyze image, you can click on, go away, stitch, and say load. Let's see what it's going to load. Okay, it's the right folder. It will load all the images, create a layout. And you can remove one or not. It's up to you. Click on uncompress, start stitching. And you get your stitch image together, right? Which you can zoom in now.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty much that with this software. And I will skip on the oil part right now because that's not something that you want to apply to your, but tomorrow when you come over here, I'll still let you practice putting the oil and so on.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, apart from that, that's pretty much it with this. So I will see you tomorrow. And what I'll do is I'll share this video with you.
Okay.
So that if you want to look at something again, you can look at it before you come
Okay.
tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so much, Gaurav. So
Yeah,
tomorrow
sure. You're
at
welcome.
10, before 10, I can meet you in your office or lab, right?
Yeah.
Downstairs.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
by the lab, and we can walk together over here.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
You're
Okay.
welcome. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.